Great. So I'm pleased to introduce our first keynote speaker, who is Matthew Wingell. Matthew is the founder and director of the Gina P. Wingell Foundation for Severely Disabled Families. He's dedicated himself to supporting families affected by lupus. Inspired by his mother, Gina, he draws on personal experience to help others navigate severe financial challenges with empathy, and clarity. As a trusted financial planner, he partners with the Lupus Foundation of America and leads initiatives through the Gina P. Wingell Foundation, the National Lupus Disability Relief effort, advocating for greater access and lasting support within the disability community. Welcome, Matthew.
Oh, thank you, Lori. I really do appreciate having the opportunity to be with all of you today. All right, so if we're ready to get started, yeah, I do want to share my screen so that you guys can see it. I do apologize if I'm looking back and forth. I just have it up on my other screen here. But let me share it and get started with you because today I do have a lot to share with you, and I know that we have another section coming up after me. So, like I said, so pleased and honored to be here. Do want to share a lot of vital information that I think will make a big difference in the lives of a lot of lupus warriors who are looking at this today. So just real quick, while I bring this up, like I said, do really appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this with you because today there is a huge misconception that exists amongst the general population about what it truly means to become disabled. And where a lot of this comes from is just simply a misunderstandings. But today I do hope to not only break down the barriers of some of those misunderstandings, but also impart onto you a basic understanding of what is disability income insurance, also known as DI, and how it relates to the ability to protect your quality of life. So, a lot of great things to learn from this. I do hope that everybody can take some notes. But again, there is going to be time for questions and answers at the end if anybody does have anything else to share or want to ask with me. So, like I mentioned, there is a huge misconception about what it means to become disabled. And unfortunately, where most people believe it can't happen to me, it's not going to happen to me, I'm young and I'm healthy, most of us, if we're lucky enough, are going to one day grow old and maybe lose our independence. And that in itself is disability. And if you look around today at almost all of the public venues that you travel to, you will see access to disability with the blue public parking and disability access in many different places. And that's because in reality, disability is an inherent part of the human experience. What most people don't realize is that shockingly, 1 out of every 4 of today's young individuals who are joining into the workforce will at some point in their lifetime experience a disabling event before they reach retirement. And so that's actually 25% of people today. Most assume those numbers are much lower. And when you ask yourself, what are my odds of becoming disabled and being forced out of the workplace? They're just as high as anybody else's. Where a lot of the misconception actually stems from is that when people think about disability, they assume it's going to be a slip and fall, a car accident, falling off the roof, or even maybe someone else's negligence. But when we actually study where do these disability claims originate from, we find that the vast, overwhelming majority of disability claims today actually come from illness and not as a result of injuries. Things like cancer, musculoskeletal disorders, depression, and of course, autoimmune diseases like lupus. These are really where most of the disability claims, in fact, over 80% of these claims are originating from these illnesses. And most people, when they think about disability, these aren't maybe the concerns that really come first and foremost to them. With lupus, we know that it's incredibly unpredictable. And so trying to navigate the challenges, the many different challenges that arise as a result of being diagnosed with lupus is incredibly difficult. And with 1 week, we could be facing issues where there's skin inflammation. And in the next few weeks, we have vital organ inflammation. And so it's difficult to understand where we're going to be with lupus, and anyone can become disabled. When you think about disability, even people who are generally healthy for most of their life, disability can and often does come on at unexpected times. So, with that being said, this is the realities of disability. But thankfully, this is where disability insurance and income protection planning steps into play. This is why it's so vital to not only have a basic understanding of it, but be able to share it with your other friends and colleagues who are also facing these challenges so that you can lead them with a little bit of confidence yourself. So, what really exactly is disability insurance? Now, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like insurance companies, and quite frankly, I'm not the biggest fan myself. But I do hope that with today's conversation, you will see a different perspective on things. With income protection and disability insurance, there's really four things that I'd like to share with you and like you to walk away with at least having an understanding of. And the first thing is that disability insurance is designed to replace your income if you're too sick and too hurt to get back to the workplace. So, whatever income you are making, you would expect to replace hopefully as much of that income as possible should you need to go on claim and should you need either disability insurance, social security disability, or any other kind of state assisted benefits. The four things that I would like you to all understand before the end of this conversation is that there is short-term disability, and this is best for a 3 to 6 month scenario. So a lot of lupus warriors who might go have a flare that does exist for a short temporary time might want to use these benefits. And for other things like minor surgeries and procedures, even pregnancy, short-term disability can step in, and there's often a short amount of time to before that you can actually receive your benefits. So it's really important piece of the disability planning process. But unfortunately, if you only had short-term planning, if you needed any kind of income protection that went longer than 3 to 6 months, this is where long-term disability would step in. And this is the second type of insurance that exists out there, group long-term disability insurance. This is something that could cover you for years, or perhaps go all the way up to retirement age if it had the parameters to do so. This is, of course, for more serious or prolonged uh, uh, any kind of symptoms for lupus that might be lasting and is likely going to take you out of the workplace, maybe permanently. This, of course, though, again, if you only had short term, only long term, this is why it's important to kind of have a blend of both, if possible, so that in any kind of disability scenario, you do have adequate coverage and planning. Now, the other areas of this is that there is coverage that we often can get through employment, which we call group insurance. And there is also coverage that we can get on an individual basis, meaning we can go out ourselves and go and find this to hopefully complement what we're receiving through the workplace. This group insurance is great. It's part of the equation if we can get it through our employer. And today we do see that about 40 to 50% of employers are generally offering disability coverage in some form or capacity. But it's really critical to sit down and understand, do I have short-term coverage? Is it only long-term coverage? And really, what would happen if I needed it? Now, with employee-sponsored coverage, there's a few things to look at, and I want to give you guys a couple of examples so that if you were to example, take your benefits booklet and sit down and look at it, you would at least have an understanding of what's inside it there. On the next slide here, this is an example of a short-term disability policy that you might see. And another thing that I dislike is jargon. And so hopefully I'm going to demystify this a bit so that it is a clear understanding of what all the terms are in your insurance policy. So if you look at the thing, you know what it's actually telling you. In a short-term scenario, like I mentioned, only 3 to 6 months of coverage generally. And again, many policies are different. So this is an example of one that you would see typically. We see a few things on the left-hand side here, benefit percent being one of them, maximum weekly benefit, the benefit duration, and something called an elimination period. This might also be referred to as a waiting period. This benefit percent is essentially the amount of income you would receive should you go on short-term disability. So you would receive 50% of your gross income, what you're making right now, if you needed to go on short-term disability claim. This maximum weekly benefit is even if you were receiving that 50%, the maximum that this policy can pay out is going to be the 1,500 on a weekly basis, which is actually not that bad. It's about 6,000 per month. So really not a far number for most average incomes. On the left-hand side here, we see two of the most important numbers, and that's going to be the benefit duration. How long could I receive these benefits for? And then underneath that, like I said, the waiting or the elimination period. That's going to be how long we would need to be waiting out on disability before we could actually receive our claim and get money in our pocket. So in this instance, as this is a short-term policy, you can see that this is a very short-term policy. And this is an actual legitimate example of somebody whose policy benefits I had reviewed. And as you can see, if they needed short-term disability, it was a very small amount of time that they could receive it. The amount of waiting is only a couple of weeks, so likely would be able to overgo that without running out their savings. But the amount of benefit duration that's there is very small. And so this is where long-term disability could step into play. And I do have an example of that on the next page. With long-term disability, it's really just a matter of how long the benefit period is going to last for. But also, with that being said, you're generally going to see a longer waiting period. So in the instance of that short term, we only had to wait 2 weeks before we could see money come into our pocket. But in the instance of this long-term disability policy, it's going to be 90 days before we could actually see our benefits come into our pocket. Now, we do have the ability to see these benefits. As you can see here, benefit duration is actually bringing us up to the Social Security retirement age. So for some people, this might be 65, others 67, maybe even 70 years old for some of the younger people. But what this means is that this long-term policy can actually take us perhaps all the way to retirement if we need a permanent disability. It does also allow us to have a larger maximum monthly benefit. As you can see here, it's giving us $8,000, which is a little bit larger than the short-term disability. So if you're making more income and you were able to get up to that maximum, it'd be great to see that full $8,000 coming back to you. Now, there's a few things here that are really important for lupus warriors, and it's actually way at the bottom of the chart here. This one right here, pre-existing conditions. For a lot of lupus warriors who have been diagnosed with lupus, and they're trying to get onto group disability coverage through an employer, it's very, very difficult. But there is policies that do cover for pre-existing conditions, and it's just vital that you understand what are the parameters around that. This one right here is a very common parameter that you're going to see in about 7 out of 10 times. There are more forgiving policies out there than this one. What this essentially means, this 312 is a little bit of industry jargon, but what it really is looking at is, oh, excuse me, that there's 3 months here of a look back period. And any time 3 months since this policy started, if you received any kind of treatment, meaning anything, treatment, consultation, medication, anytime within that 3 month period, and you became disabled 12 months after we started the policy, it is possible that they would not cover your pre-existing condition. So if you're looking at this, this is the look back number. how far since you started the policy, the carrier could look back and see when you received treatment. And this 12 here, this is how long after you started the policy that if you became disabled within that time, they might not cover you. Now, there is instances of much shorter numbers here. And if you do own a group long-term disability policy and you've overgone that 12-month period, your policy is going to cover you just like any other disability. So again, it's really important that you open it up and see if you even have these pre-existing conditions laid out in your policy in the first place. One other important thing here is the definition of disability. In this instance, it's giving you something, it's called 2 years own occupation. And we're going to really understand what own occupation and the other definition, which is any occupation, hopefully before the end of this conversation. Own occupation essentially states that if you are disabled in what you're currently trained for, we can receive benefits and we could even go out and maybe get another job. And so a great example of this is a surgeon who becomes disabled and they can't get on the table anymore. They're no longer able to perform surgeries, but maybe they've had a lot of experience and knowledge, and now they can train and teach. With own occupation, that disability coverage would continue to pay even if they went out and started teaching because they're disabled as, of course, a surgeon. So with this policy, it's actually giving you 2 years to be able to do that, which is a really great benefit. And I think own occupation is a really important feature, especially for lupus warriors to highlight. Now, we know that with lupus, it can also be a mentally debilitating challenge, a lot of stress, PTSD, depression, anxiety. A lot of disability policies do not cover mental health challenges, and some of them do, but for a very short period of time. In this instance, the long-term policy is actually providing some benefit for mental health, but this is only at a 2-year, 24-month period. So if any instance of depression, PTSD, anxiety was to take you out of the workplace, it's generally with these group long-term policies that you're only going to see about 24 months, 2 years is generally the industry standard of how long you would receive those benefits. Now, with individual policies, there is the ability to pay a little bit more. And of course, we could then waive that and receive coverage on a mental illness just as any other disability. But with most of these group benefits, which a lot of the lupus warriors who are currently employed and they're either seeking disability or they're looking to get out of their current employment situation, but they really don't know how to get out. If you have disability benefits, expect that that would really be the best that they could get for any kind of those mental health challenges. With all that being said, the biggest thing to keep an eye on here is this 50% benefit period. Because if I was to ask you, hey, if you were to go on disability and I was to take away half of your monthly income, how are you going to handle that? Generally, most people are going to have a very difficult time losing 50% of their income. And so, although there is benefits here, this clearly is not enough to take person throughout their whole lifetime. And that drawdown will also be taxed because the benefits in here are generally paid throughout by an employer. And so because the employer is paying that themselves, when you receive these benefits in your pocket, the government is going to take a portion out for taxes. And so that monthly benefit, that maybe that 8,000 that you see there, might not be all that you expect it to be. However, individual coverage, if you do also have that, that is non-taxable. And so it is going to be able to offset, hopefully, the tax difference that you would have received from just simply owning group long-term disability. But also understand this, most of these group long-term disability policies do not cover pre-existing conditions favorably. And so if possible, work with an employer to understand their benefits and what they have offering before you sign any kind of agreement with them. So that you know if this is something to anticipate in the future, you do have the proper amount of coverage. This is so important for lupus warriors because, like I mentioned, even in remission, we really don't know when a flare could strike, and they could strike at any unexpected time. Many lupus warriors today are taking time out of work, even on a temporary basis. They're reducing their hours, they're reducing their workload, they're not able to fulfill the entirety of the role that they've trained for. And so when we talk about income with people, I ask the question, what do you think is your most valuable asset? And a lot of people think it might be their business or their home or their car or even their family. But in reality, it is their health and their own ability to get up every day and go to work and generate that income for themselves. Because when you look at the long-term income accumulating potential of one individual who's maybe making even just $65,000 a year, it could be millions by the end of their lifetime. So income is really the most valuable asset that we have. And income protection, it does not only protect ourselves, but it also protects our family and their future, our children and our dependents. Any financial hit that we experience will impact our dependents and their futures down the road. When we think about covering daily expenses, we assume that these are very easy to go day by day and overlook, but as they add up at the end of the month, I'm sure that all of us know how quickly those expenses can add up, and even just a few weeks of missing our bills could quickly turn us into owing several groups of people a lot of money. That does take us a long time to dig ourselves the hole out of. The biggest thing with income protection, though, is that it's going to prevent additional hardships for us. We're already trying our best to mitigate our sickness, follow our doctor's advice, try and stay healthy. And when we have financial stress, it truly does make everything so much more difficult. That if we could take one of those things off of our plate, hopefully our recovery and our road to it will be much shorter. Our ability to get back to some form of gainful employment will exist, and that unfortunately other issues won't spiral into compounding problems like home repairs that can't be done, car repairs that can't be made, or even, for example, we're not able to put our children in the education that we want to. So it's so important that we think about these things and we at least have an understanding of them, not just for ourselves, but for our spouses, for our friends, and for our coworkers and colleagues, so that they too, we can go and put our head on the pillow at night, that if anybody needed these things, we can at least feel good that we had this conversation with them. With that being said, even if we have short-term disability, group long-term disability, there is that idea of a gap that it's not going to cover the total amount of income that we need. And a lot of us another one of these big misconceptions that actually exist out there is that a lot of us are relying on Social Security disability to fill in the gaps where really either group insurance or individual insurance should be filling in first. And why is because Social Security disability, the rates of approval are so low and the rates of denial are so high that it could be a very long time, as well as just simply a emotionally taxing process for us to be able to get on and approved for Social Security disability income. Again, that's not covering the total amount of our income either. So there is always this persistent income gap that if we become disabled, we might never experience the ability to receive the total amount of the income that we were receiving before we became disabled. And so, what really is a comprehensive plan here then? What is the goal with looking at this for someone in my perspective? When I look at somebody and their plan, what does it really mean to have a comprehensive income protection plan laid out for somebody? What that means is that I have the ability to get you as close to 100% of that pre-disability income back in your pocket and hopefully on a tax favored basis as possible, should you go on claim and if you really needed it. That is what is a truly sound income protection plan. But just relying on those Social Security group plan, it's not quite enough. And so this is where the individual disability insurance does step into play because it is able to cover the gaps, the waiting periods, the other 40% to 50% of income, and the non-guarantees that come with applying for Social Security disability. Now, I mentioned the idea of an income gap, and there is a natural persistence of an income gap no matter where we go with our planning. And that is just simply a result that these benefits don't always cover 100%. And most instances are not going to cover us for 100% because there has to be some kind of a return to work incentive. If people were receiving as much money as they were on disability, if as if they were working, then a lot of people who truly didn't need to stay on disability would stay on disability for as long as they possibly can, which would generally drain down the systems that are in place for people who really need it. And so often it is difficult to achieve that 100% income replacement if you went on claim. In the chart right here, this is actually an example of what is the income gap. And you can see that somebody who's making an example of a $100,000 salary, they're also receiving $20,000 in bonus. After taxes, okay, 25% for taxes, they take that 90,000 of net income and put that away in their pocket. But most of those group policies, again, are only covering 60%. And so this example is showing what it would look like if you had a 60% group long-term disability policy that covered up to $5,000 a month. Now, looking at this, you can see that this person's plan would only cover about half of their net income. And so that income gap would be about 50% for them. Again, this is where that individual disability planning comes into play. Because again, Social Security disability, rigorous approval, high rate of denials, but it is great for that long-term money because it could come in for the rest of your life all the way till retirement. And so with Social Security disability, it is a much longer term benefit period. But group long-term disability, if you just had that, we're only relying on that, there is going to be this huge income gap, especially now when we take taxes out of this equation. This 45,000 that's being shown in the gray block here is not actually going to be the 45,000 that's put in someone's pocket. And so they're living on this $90,000 gross lifestyle, but now we've slashed that in half to just 45,000. So the only way to cover that gap is essentially by relying on either Social Security disability when it comes into play or individual disability insurance. But again, Social Security, we don't know when that's going to come in. And even individual disability insurance, it's a little more expensive. So it's harder to qualify for. And it's a little bit more extensive to go on claim. So it's not also the end all be all solution, but it is kind of highlight the importance of why we need to rely on having several of these different safety nets because nobody really has the crystal ball and we can't necessarily predict what our disability experience is going to look like if we're going to be able to recover from what we believe should be generally easy recoveries could end up taking much, much longer than we expect. And then a lot of instances where we come back to the workplace and we feel like we're healthy, but something arises again, which does inevitably take us back out of the workplace, and we end up experiencing what's known as a recurrent disability. So any of those types of experiences could happen with somebody. In California, we do have a state-assisted benefit, which is generally actually a little bit better than the other 4 states that this benefit is offered to, but only 5 states across the United States do right now offer a state cash sickness benefit. And so this is really the last line of defense. For those of you who are self-employed, if you are not elected for coverage, you can elect yourself on a self-elected basis. but you have to make sure that you are elected. So for anybody who owns their own small businesses, make sure that you actually elected to be a part of state cash sickness benefits in California, because they are generally a little bit more robust than what you see across the other 5 states. With California's, we actually see as high as a $1,600 weekly benefit, and that can go for 52 weeks, so about a year. So with California sickness benefits, if you are an employee of California, you will see that there's a small deduction in your salary that's taken out to pay for that. But if you needed the benefit, this state cash sickness benefit is offered to employees of California. And the difference, though, with your individual and how that all works is that these benefits are coordinated. So, what's first going to happen is most of us have some kind of a sick leave. That sick leave would be exhausted first. And then we would exercise these different tools as you needed them. So things like our short-term disability, if you were on short-term claim, long-term, if it went on long-term, or in California's instance, you guys do have a fantastic state cash sickness benefit, which could take you for as long as a year. But again, it doesn't cover the entirety of your income. It will cover, though, about 60 to 70%. So it's a pretty robust benefit overall. And I would certainly look into making sure that you understand how to apply for it. And I don't necessarily have that as a part of the presentation here, but if anybody is looking to use those benefits, that is definitely something that I could help you look at. Now, there's a lot of things that are actually at your disposal. You do have group coverage, we do have individual coverage, state assistance, and even federal assistance with Social Security disability. But all of these things have pros and cons. And like I said, it's important to weigh them and maybe even have a little bit of a blending of everything so that you know how it's going to relate to a different disability scenario if you're impacted by anything that could actually arise. One thing that I like to share with people is that it is best to start saving a 3 to 6 month disposable emergency savings fund. And a lot of people, it is difficult and does take some time. But this would just simply be a disciplined monthly setting aside some of our income so that if we needed to wait out a waiting period, 3, 6 months, a few years, we would at least have something that's there to draw down on that income before we start depleting other vital assets that we might have. That could also penalize us from early withdrawal, like retirement plans. That's a big one that a lot of people, if they don't have emergency savings funds, they go and try to take access out of their 401k to make the difference. And unfortunately, with the way that the rules are set out before 59 and a half, you are going to see a 10% penalty as well as income tax, any of the money that you take out of there. So not only are you sacrificing that huge potential of long-term growth that money in your 401k could afford you, but you're also now going to have to pay all that penalty and you're not going to see a lot of that money. It's best to start saving an emergency savings plan as quickly as possible and make that a true discipline because what that's going to do is allow you to wait out these waiting periods if you have group insurance plans or an individual plan, or even if you're waiting to get on to Social Security disability. If you look at the example here, this is based on a average $65,000 salary, just a 3 month pool. You can see actually that it is a fair amount of money. $16,000 is what you would need for that 3 months to be able to successfully overgo your waiting period and hopefully not impact your financial future that significantly. Like I said, you're going to want to have a blending of everything if possible, but it's not always the case. Some people have one or the other. The best approach is to try and have a blending of best of both worlds. But in the instance of the group plans, you do have an affordable plan, and it is certainly always at best part of the plan. Because if we're only relying on individual coverage, that amount of money that we're paying for that is going to be significantly higher. Whereas most of these group plans is going to be employer paid, and you're not even going to see that taken out of your paycheck. However, Like I said, it doesn't cover everything. So the individual plan can come in, cover that gap, and provide non-taxable benefits. Since the individual plan is actually being paid out of your pocket, those benefits that are coming back to you won't be taxable. And so that will actually create a huge offset, give you a lot more money back in your pocket if you went on claim. The other thing that's great about the individual coverage is, God forbid you do get laid off, or you do decide to leave your current job, and they do have great benefits in place. Or perhaps the employer decides that they don't want to pay for this coverage anymore. The individual plan is where you can fall back on because it is portable, meaning you can take it from job to job, industry to industry, and you will still have that coverage as long as you're paying it on time and you stay up to date with it, they'll keep it in place for you. But the group plan is not always the best to rely on because there has been instances where one year the business just simply isn't doing good and they do start to reduce the benefits and maybe take away your short or your long-term disability plan that you have. So definitely some big things to think about. If you guys are not currently covered through your employer and you don't know what you have, it is definitely a good practice to come off this call and as quickly as possible contact them so that you could apply and enroll in either group short-term or long-term disability. And also double check because you might believe that you have what is in there, but it's not really when you look at what's on the pieces of paper. You have to really read these things carefully. And generally, they make them fairly easy to get enrolled, simple process with sharing some of your personal info. A lot of times they don't have any kind of exams or physical checkups that you would need to be able to get approved for the insurance. And they do nowadays with electronic signatures and all of these other things, even electronic medical records. It is generally a lot easier to get approved for coverage and have even maybe additional features added onto your plan. But I would certainly suggest take your HR person and use their time to your fullest advantage. Look at the benefits that you have and grab a copy of your booklet so that you can see if you have the short term, long term, what is the benefit period? How does that rate going to work and relate to if you needed it for your situation dealing with lupus? A few things here that I think are really important to highlight for lupus warriors is that there's key features in these plans that are going to either make or break difference for you and your experience. And generally speaking, I did mention a few of these things. One is, of course, you want to make sure that you do have that short or long-term blend because you might end up needing long-term benefits and you come to realize that there's only short-term benefits available for you through your employer. If you don't have the long-term benefits, this is another reason why the individual plans could come in and substitute for one of those gaps that you might experience. There's also a feature that I haven't mentioned yet, which is something called the waiver of premium. And this is so important to take a look at for anybody who does own those individual plans, or if they are paying for it out of pocket. I mentioned the employer plans are generally paid for and sponsored by them, but there is a lot of times where there's employer set up group plans, but there is paid for out of pocket by the employee as well. But that allows them maybe to receive some additional benefits and features. And with waiver of premium, it basically states that if you were to satisfy your waiting period and you were to continue on disability claim, the insurance carrier would waive your individual disability insurance premium. And so that's really important because you don't want to end up be paying for these benefits while you need them. 9 times out of 10, that's already incorporated as a part of your plan. But for a lot of these group plans that are set up by the employer, but that are paid for out of pocket by the employee, it's possible that you would still see that deduction even while you're on disability claim. So it's a really important feature to take a look at and highlight. I also mentioned the idea of own occupation, any occupation. If you have a policy and it states own occupation in there, you can go out and seek other employment, maybe even start a small or part-time job or role if you're receiving disability claim, but for example, you are disabled from being able to perform your main duties. And so this is an incredibly powerful feature that unfortunately the definitions inside of here and any of your policies that you're looking at sometimes can again be what makes or breaks, allows you to get on claim and be approved, or they try to make a case that you're not able to receive your benefits. So really important to understand the definition that's within, but own occupation is really great for lupus warriors if you have it within there. Pre-existing conditions are also really key because, of course, a lot of us have already been diagnosed with lupus. We don't know what to do. We're trying to find a way out of either our current role. We're looking to get on claim, but we've been denied. We need to keep that income flowing, but we know that our symptoms are progressing. And at one point, it might become impossible for us to get back into the workplace. And in that instance, it is so important to understand the limitations on the pre-existing condition clauses, which I did again mention a little bit earlier, but they really are key in the ability for a lupus warrior to have any kind of benefit coming out of their group benefits. Lastly, the really other important feature that I want you guys to see is partial disability benefits. We can be either partially disabled or totally disabled, meaning most of these plans say that if we're out for a certain percentage of time, that's considered just temporarily disabled. But if we're out this percentage of time, we are totally disabled because that's the majority of the time that we're out and away from our workplace. Most of the time, the partial disability start at about 20%. So if you're losing either 20% of your income, or perhaps you're losing at least a day out of a 5-day work week, you will be considered for partial disability benefits. Anything more than that, over 75% is generally for most carriers the line of where you would be considered totally disabled. And then you would get a lot more access to your benefits. But not all these plans incorporate partial disability benefits. And so the worst thing that you would be in is that you are out of work for, say, 50 or 40% of the time because you're recovering from a treatment where you just simply can no longer perform your duties, but you come to realize that your plan does not incorporate that partial disability benefit feature. So really, it is the last one because it is one of the most important. It is a terrible thing when I do look at people and they need their benefits, but unfortunately, they're just not in the current scenario where that plan is going to be able to afford it for them. And so again, that does highlight that need to have a blending of as much of this as possible. As a closing comment here, I do want to say that most people who address income protection and disability insurance do come at it from a place of fear. And, they highlight the worst case scenarios as a way to get people to take on action and motivate them to make changes in their life, usually positive changes, but they do highlight that this could be the worst case. What would happen if you don't have it and you need it? And really, what I love to do, and while fear can be a really powerful motivator to get people to take the action that they need to for themselves, what I really love to do is show people that income protection is really one of the most powerful, positive, and generally proactive things that we can do and have for ourselves financially speaking. When we talk about truly holistic planning for people, it really is about balancing both the idea of optimism and caution, that we are going to plan for the best case things in life. We do want to always, best things for us, hope that that's going to come out the way that we expect them to. But unfortunately, the reality of life is just that things don't always come the way that we expect them to. And so if we really want to have a comprehensive plan, it is important to balance the best with the worst and make sure that we are planning for the great things, the future weddings, purchasing our future homes, living hopefully where we want to, having the jobs that we want to, and generally having a quality of life that meets our expectations of comfort. But we must also know that we do need to be prepared for in case the worst case happens, so that no matter what, we can put our heads down on the pillow at night and feel confident about where we sit financially. So again, thank you all so much. I know this is a lot of information, but I truly hope that this made a difference in your perspective on income protection and how it relates to yourselves. I know that there's a lot of individual people out there, and I don't ever like to say that someone else's experience should be compared to another's because everybody experiences things so differently. But I do try my best to show people that these are generally the most accepted ways of doing the right things, even though there isn't really a golden guidelines of how to make these things work out the best way for people. I do generally try my best, show everybody this is what you have, this is what's working for you, this is the roads that you can take to hopefully get on that path to planning towards the best, even if you are experiencing the worst cases. So again, thank you, everybody. I'm more than happy to share anything that I have for any questions with any of you.
Thank you, Matthew. That was so informative and so good. We've already got a couple questions that have come in, so
Oh,
I want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, type them in the Q&A and we'll get through as many as we can. And then any that we don't get to, I'm happy to send them to Matthew and we'll see if he can answer them. And then I'll send them out in an email to everyone so we can all hear the answers. Okay?
yes.
Great. Thank you so much. So our first question that came in was, I'm assuming it's what does disability insurance look like in retirement? I'm 59 and eligible for my pension and health insurance. I'm not sure I can commit to another full-time position to supplement the pension, especially without the FMLA protections as I have now.
Right, right. Absolutely. That is a great question. And being 59 and a half, we do consider you right now to be in what we call the retirement red zone, just generally about 10 years to your retirement or 10 years out of your retirement. We do look at this as one of the more fragile positions of yourself financially. And so, where would disability insurance sit with you is that most of these plans only cover up to your retirement age. And so they're bringing in income while you're in your working years. However, it is so important to make sure that some of that income is being redirected back into a retirement plan because if you go on claim while you're in the working years and you do end up needing it throughout the entirety of those working years, all the way up to 65, 67, 70, and we haven't put time into contributing towards the retirement, a lot of those benefits are going to turn off for us. Now, at that time, we will have the switch over from the potential of receiving Social Security disability to Social Security income. And so that can supplement what you would be receiving, pulling out, starting with your pension, as well as if you had other forms of retirement savings there. And we that SSDI would eventually transition over to that Social Security income that you would have qualified for as a result of your employment. But that again is going to take a little bit of time. And you generally at 59, it's going to be a little too soon before you could access and really get the full maximum potential of those benefits there. So most people that I'm talking to, they're looking at this from around 62 to 67, even delaying their benefits, because at that point in time, the monthly amount that you're going to receiving is going to be much greater. But unfortunately, that's a huge thing that I go out there and advocate for, that a lot of these insurance plans do offer the ability to contribute towards retirement if you went on claim. So I would first check in if your insurance plan did have what we call a provision that would allow those retirement contributions to continue while you were on disability claim. A lot of plans do incorporate that, but they often carry with them additional costs for your employer. So I'm not sure if you have that feature, but that is certainly a first place that you would want to look in. And then look into as you get closer towards 62. if you could, or at least delay a little further for turning on that Social Security income, that's really going to be the best place to go because a lot of this insurance will turn off as you reach that retirement age.
Great, thank you. Another question, do you have a checklist for income protection for disability?
Yes, yes, actually, I do. I have several pieces available on this. One that actually it lines out exactly what your group disability plan would look like, what your short-term plan would look like, what are things that you need to look for, different terms. And it's only like a couple pages, but yes, absolutely. If we could perhaps get this out to the audience, I'd be more than happy to supply it and then get it be sent out to everybody.
Great. Yep. If you send that to me, I can include it with the email about the video and everything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
that would be great. Okay. So remember, keep typing in your questions. Another question is, how does this coordinate with sick leave?
Oh, really great question. Really great question. Um, Typically, most of our employers do have some form of sick leave available to us, and we see it anywhere between a week to 2 weeks. But there is the potential with a lot of employers that you have accumulating hours, maybe as much as 40 hours of sick time. And in those instances, we are actually going to exhaust the sick leave prior to receiving any kind of disability benefits. And in fact, it is a lot of the provisions laid out in the plans that you do need to make sure you exhaust all that sick leave before you can start seeing benefits. Now, if you had short-term coverage, the short-term benefits would then kick in after the sick leave is exhausted. If you didn't and you only, for example, had long-term coverage, you would have to exhaust the sick leave, but you would wait out the longer waiting period and then the long-term benefits could kick in for you. But that is, we do coordinate these benefits directly so that you are receiving only your maximum amount of income. You are never going to give you more than 100% of income. So that's why it's very difficult to layer up these benefits because we're only going to get you about, as generally speaking, about 75 to 90% is usually the high side of what you're going to see in terms of disability benefits back. But really, that is a great question.
Okay, great. Another one has popped up. Do you provide income protection planning services for individuals?
I do. When I come on for these educational pieces, I really do work as a nonprofit capacity. But in my professional life, I am a disability insurance specialist with
Mhm.
Mass Mutual. And so I do work very closely with many families. In fact, I just surpassed 200 families working with directly right now, currently, who are in some need of planning. So yes, if anybody needs help and assistance, not always that I'm going to professionally guide you, but I do work also on a no cost basis. More than happy to sit down with you, look at what you have, and give you the best advice and knowledge that is available to you.
Okay, great. So I think maybe with our email out to everyone who's attended, we can give them your information, maybe your email as well. Would that be
Certainly.
okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
no problem. No
okay,
problem.
great. We've got time for a few more questions. So here's one, is maternity covered?
Oh, that is a really great question, especially because with lupus warriors, we know that the vast majority of people who are facing this disease are women. And unfortunately, several years ago, not many years ago, but several years ago, maternity was not really covered a lot with disability insurance. And now today, there's been such an uproar about it that actually a lot more carriers are actually covering it than ever before. So yes, maternity leave, whether it be regular complications from vaginal birth, cesarean birth, or even things like postpartum depression are nowadays being considered for as a claim. So yes, it's a really important question, and nowadays we are looking at that a lot more favorably.
Right. All right. Another question. Can I get disability insurance if I've already been diagnosed with lupus?
That's a really great question. Um, probably one of the most important questions for a lot of people, I think,
Mhm.
on there is because, yes, it is possible, but with some limitations. And even after experiencing your lupus diagnosis, it is possible, but a lot of them do exclude lupus and related complications from the coverage. If you do have it, though, sometimes it also carries with it a little bit higher cost that they will be willing to allow that coverage, but you might pay a little bit more than the average rate within the group. As well as on the individual side, it is possible that you can still receive your disability coverage, but maybe they will exclude lupus and complications as a result from it. Now, that is not to say, though, that we should not incorporate as much income protection as possible, because already having lupus, there are many people that I'm working with right now who actually have other diseases as well. Uh, Cancer being actually one of the bigger ones, believe it or not, that some people are facing both cancer and lupus simultaneously. And it is just one of the worst case scenarios that I've actually seen out there. But in those instances, where they do have disability coverage, it does provide for many of the other complications that could result or other afflictions that might just appear throughout people's lifetime, even while they have lupus. So, yes, it is possible. But generally speaking, it's a much harder and it does carry with it some limitations, but with proper guidance, you will have a much better understanding of what's available to you.
Okay, great. One more just popped up. What if we overlap autoimmune with other multiple rare diseases? Can we even get coverage? I've never been able to get life insurance outside of work, let alone disability benefits.
It's a great question. And of course, depending on the severity of those, what we call them is either comorbidities or comortalities. And generally, I don't necessarily know the exact calculation of how they came up with how they price and allow for coverage and based on the severity and the time of diagnosis and the current treatment, many different factors do come in, which plays the ability to receive your benefits. But it does appear that with those comorbidities being more so what would end up causing you to get out of the workplace and disable you, comortalities and the life insurance side being more so as what would end up, unfortunately, allowing you to pass away. When you can't receive life insurance, there is actually something out there. It's referred to as second to die insurance. And this is really the best option for somebody who's experiencing lupus. If you have a spouse and they're willing, what we do is we write two individuals on the insurance rather than the one. So I'm not sure if husband or wife. In this case, let's just say that the wife was uninsurable and couldn't receive that life insurance, but they did still want to make sure that they provide a legacy to their benefits, who would perhaps be either dependents or the children. In that case, second to die insurance allows us to write both the husband and the wife on one plan and allow to cover that uninsurable party. But it does come with the caveat that both individuals are going to pass before those benefits come out. What that does do, though, is it allows the coverage to extend to both parties and it drastically improves the amount of coverage that you could get rather than having it just all be on the husband, for example, if the wife was uninsurable. And so, if we want to get coverage, second to die option is really the best for uninsurable life insurance. And then, in the terms of disability insurance, depending on the age, and on your ability to continue employment, I think you had mentioned that it'd be a little bit more difficult to continue working. But really, it is going to be looking at what do I have offered from my state assistance and Social Security disability. Unless you can get into an employer that is offering the group plan, that would be the best way to do it. But
Mhm.
it's not necessarily going to be available to everybody. And maybe you're not in that condition to be able to take that on right now, but there are certainly nowadays more remote roles that allow you to do that. But again, I would look more so at the Social Security disability first as your front line of defense there.
Okay. Do you have time for one more question?
I do, as long as I,
Okay.
I know that we have another panel.
Yeah,
So as
yeah.
long as we're
This will be
still
my
on it,
last one.
sure.
Oh, one more just popped up. Let's see what this one is. I will do contact information, which is what she's asking for, so I will do that.
Absolutely.
The last question is, what should I do if my disability claim is denied because of lupus?
Absolutely. Great question. The first thing to do is certainly don't panic. Um, this does happen often. And in fact, with Social Security disability, that's going to be your 9 times out of 10 experience. So we do want you to not panic. Appeals are a very commonplace part of this process. And whether it's Social Security disability or income protection with your group insurance individual coverage, review the denial letter carefully. Oftentimes what they're looking at is not the whole picture. And it's up to us to be able to provide them that clarity, but we need to gather as much medical documentation as possible. Even when you're looking at Social Security disability, you need to have everything documented as best as possible because it is going to lend huge credits towards your ability to get on claim and not be denied. Even with a great amount of medical proof, it is still challenging process and again can take many months. So don't panic. Read the claim letter carefully. Gather up as much of that medical documentation as possible. And at that point, we would want to either consult our attorney or our representation, or even simply patient advocacy. So before we go and we look towards, bringing in an attorney, or if we really need to take that route, spending any more money than we need to, let's see if there's any kind of patient advocacy that's out there who could help guide us and make sure that if what we provided the carrier could be clarified in just a few more pieces of information that could allow us to get on claim, let's not sweat it. Let's try that process first.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. This has been such a fantastic session. I think everybody learned a ton. I know I did. Wow. This is going to be a great session to post on our website as well. So thank you so much for your expertise and your time. I will email out a link to everyone with the video of this, and it will include your email address as well, if you're okay with that,
Sure,
so that people can reach out to you to discuss, different options for disability. But
certainly,
thank you
absolutely.
so much again. We truly appreciate your time and your expertise, Matthew.
Yes, yes, I do really look forward to having a long-term and fruitful relationship with the soon-to-be California Lupus Foundation.
Yep.
Uh, and I do hope that you guys see me again, but please do reach out with any questions or comment. It was a tremendous honor to be able to share this information with you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Thank you. Everyone else that's remaining,